So you likely know our next speaker either by reputation or you've met him in person. He's also been featured by Apple quite a bit over the years. He's been recognized for his skill as a designer and also for his attention to accessibility. He has a new app that he'll talk about a little bit later, but the one that I use and love is his app Art of Fauna, which is stunning and pays attention to so many details. And he's also just the nicest guy. So here to talk to you about crafting apps that stand out, please welcome Klemens.
Thank you. Is that on? Or do we switch it on? Oh. Does it work? Yeah, okay, perfect. So hi, I'm Klemens. Thank you, Daniel, for the introduction. And I want to talk to you about how I built my apps. And I want to start my presentation with a little story that starts in January of 2014. Back then, I just started studying here. This is the Graz University of Technology, the beautiful computer science campus. And one of the first things that we had to learn there were regular expressions. And to be honest, I was not super keen about how they were taught at the university, so I was not really happy about that, and I thought, how can I make that a little bit more interesting and more exciting to me, and also a little bit of a challenge. So I owned one of these things back in the day. I couldn't afford an iPhone, but I had an iPod Touch, and I played around with many apps there, and I wanted to build my own. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to learn both regular expressions, but also how to build an app. So I bought this book, which is Objective-C 2.0 by Stefan Kochan, because Swift wasn't around yet, and I started programming. And a couple of days later, I had this. This is the first prototype of my very first app, which was called Cleany, which is like a crossword-type regular expression game, where you have regular expressions on each edge of the crossword, and you have to solve all the regular expressions to fill out what's in there. And I was quite happy with my first little prototype and my first little app, so I thought of what does an app really have to be released on the App Store. So I came up with a bunch of different things, like an iPad version, many levels, Game Center support, push notifications, many things I did not know anything about, and many things that were just too much, basically, for me to implement. But I was happy about the project, and I started coding, and then exam season came. So I had to completely stop working on my fun little projects. I had to actually study, and not only the exam for regular expressions, but also exams about maths and some other fun stuff. And so I wrote the exams, I came back a couple of weeks later, and then I looked again on Cleany. And coming back to the project, nothing really excited me anymore. So the main purpose of building this thing in the first place, passing the regular expression exam, that was done because I passed that exam. But also, like the core concept was not the most super exciting thing, so I could have guessed it myself that a regular expression crossword puzzle game is not the most exciting thing in the world. But yeah, I wasn't happy with the design. I was not happy with many of the different things, so I just stopped working on that. And then a couple of weeks passed by. I didn't touch iOS anymore, and then one day, in April 2014, I was sitting at home. I was rocking this watch back then, and I was staring at it and had an idea for a little puzzle game where you have like a simple statement like 1 + 1 is 2, and you would swipe up if it's correct or swipe down if it's incorrect. And I was thinking about math questions, but also geographic questions like Sevilla is the capital of Spain, and you would swipe down because that is not true. And why watch-based? Because back then, the Apple Watch was heavily rumored. We didn't know when exactly it would come out, but we knew that it will come out at one point of time. And So I thought, I'm just gonna develop my idea for iOS. Surely Apple will bring UIKit to the Apple Watch and porting it will be super, super easy. I was very wrong about that part, but I did start coding anyway, and this is the very first prototype of this little game, where you have math questions, like 10 plus 6 is 16, and you get 1 minute to solve as many as possible of that. And I called that project Elementary Minute. And I again had the same problem as before. Exam season came around, and I had to fully stop working on Elementary Minute. But this time, things were a little bit different, because this time I had a prototype, I had a little game that really kind of stood out to me, that was fun to me. Every second that I had in between learning, I could just whip that out and play a minute of this little game, and it immediately delighted me, and I had an itch under my fingers that I just wanted to jump back into programming this thing. So exam season passed by, but the game stuck with me, and I wrote down again far too many things that I thought needed to be in there in the first version. So it took me until December of 2014 when I finally released Elementary Minute. And then by the time Apple already announced the Apple Watch in February of 2015, we got the SDK for watchOS, and I wanted to be one of the first games on the Apple Watch. And the idea of being one of the first games on the Apple Watch sounded super exciting to me back then. I had never worn an Apple Watch and didn't know that playing anything for a minute like this is not super fun. But I did it anyway, and it was one of the first 4 games on the Apple Watch. And I was very happy about that. And after I launched it on the Apple Watch, I suddenly got this email, like 2 weeks before WWDC 2015. Hello, Klemens, I need to speak to you today. Let me know what your number is. And I honestly thought this was spam and didn't want to reply to that first, but I blanked out the name of the person, but I looked him up and he seemed legit, so I sent him his number, and he asked me, yeah, we want to support smaller developers. We saw what you did for Elementary Minute on the Apple Watch, and we want to do a little featuring. Can you send us some assets? And by the way, WWDC is happening in 2 weeks. Do you want to come to WWDC? And by the time, I've never traveled alone and never outside of Europe, but it was a chance that was too good to pass on. And so I found myself flying to San Francisco 2 weeks later, and then went to WWDC, and that contact at Apple always nudged me into sitting down for first the keynote, then the State of the Union, and then finally for the Apple Design Awards. And then sitting there, knowing absolutely nothing, first winner is getting announced, and my face was up there. And I had... And yeah, thank you. And I had my student Apple Design Award for Elementary Minute. And all of this is almost exactly 10 years ago. And after getting the student Apple Design Award, because it was not held to the same standards as the usual Apple Design Award, my contact at Apple told me, one day you're gonna hold the real thing in your hand. And this year, exactly 10 years later, in the week when that guy actually retired from Apple, I won my real Apple Design Award for a little game called The Art of Fauna. And thank you. But Art of Fauna and Elementary Minute weren't the only 2 apps and games that I built over the years. I made these 7 games and apps plus 1. One more was just released earlier this week for iOS 26, which is called Pocket Shelf. And all the apps and games other than Pocket Shelf were all developed while I was either studying or working at different companies. So I was never full-time indie up to a year ago, and I always had to juggle my time between my projects and like real work. So I always ran into situations where I was away from my projects, where I couldn't touch them for weeks, either because there was just too much time to too much things to do at work, or I was just burned out and things like that. And the difference between, I made many more prototypes than the ones that you see here, and the difference between the apps that actually came out and the apps that never saw the light of day is that they had something memorable. Something that stuck with me, something where I could get away from the app for weeks and I could pick up the game again and immediately know why am I doing this to myself, why am I spending so much time in building this, because they had something memorable, something exciting, something that really stuck out to me. And while preparing this talk, I looked at many other apps that I really like, and I think they follow something similar. So for example, Gentle Streak, one of my favorite apps, it's a fitness tracker that has beautiful animations, beautiful graphics, but it also does fun things like breaking down how many calories you burned by showing you burger and pizza emojis and stuff like that. Or Highlight Camera, where the first thing that you see there is like this little manual that looks like a camera manual. So from the very beginning, you know the people who built this care about it and want to make something memorable, something fun and exciting. So I absolutely loved it. And favorite example is everything that the people at Not Boring Apps do. They can make very boring apps like a calculator super fun with just little animations and little sound effects and make the most delightful thing out of the most boring stuff, like also a wonderful checkmark animation. Absolutely love that. And so all of those apps have something memorable, and all of those apps have won an Apple Design Award at one time. And so the core message here is that you should find something memorable to help you stand out, which is kind of the obvious part, but also it's super important to have that to get you through the rough patches of development, because you will run into the rough patches of development sooner or later. And when I build an app, I always run through 4 phases. And the first one is the idea. The second one is a prototype. The third one is I refine the prototype. And the fourth is actually releasing it. And I want to show how I built an app by 2 examples, which is Study Snacks and the Art of Fauna. And Study Snacks is like a vocabulary trainer, but also geography trainer, where you have a list of knowledge and you can click study, and the knowledge is split into syllables, and then you have to put the pieces back together. So for example, here I'm learning Spanish, and I need to learn what yellow means in Spanish, and it would be amarillo, and yeah, something like that. Very simple, but still quite a fun game, or app. And the other app is called the Art of Fauna, which is a jigsaw-like puzzle game, where you have real historical animal images, and you have to put the image back together. As you see, there's a pattern. I like to do stuff where things are torn apart and I have to put them back together. But it's super, super simple. It's easy to play, and it's easy to understand how the thing works, but it's just feels nice. And coming to an idea. And for me, an idea, I get inspired where I least expect it usually. So, for example, Pocket Shelf, the idea came while I was sitting at holiday and was reading a book. Or, as we discussed before, Elementary Minute came to me when I was just staring on my watch. And I had another idea that happened when I was going into a museum. For Study Snacks in particular, I had the idea while I was watching this, which is Ex Machina, and it's a far stretch of coming from a sci-fi movie to a vocabulary trainer, but it's how it happened, and if you want to know the details, I can explain them to you later. And for the Art of Fauna, I had the idea while I was just scrolling through Instagram, and I found this channel, which is called the Biodiversity Heritage Library, who scan in old books from the 18th and 19th century, and they make the images available for free because the people who drew those images are long gone. And as soon as I saw those images, I couldn't stop scrolling because they were so beautiful, and I knew I had to do something with that. So, core message is to take breaks and to get inspired. Up next is the prototype. And for the prototype, I want to get to a result as quickly as possible. And that means I don't care about clean code, I don't care about an app architecture, I don't care about the data model or anything like that. I just want to have a quick result, use familiar technologies, copy code over from old projects or from sample projects. If I don't know a technology, then I use Apple sample projects, or I go to the AI and talk to Claude to spit out some code. But it's just super important to get to some result as quickly as possible so that you can prove if your idea actually makes sense and if it is fun and if it's something that you want to have. And it's super okay to throw away all that code afterwards. You don't have to, but it's okay. Because you know so much better the requirements of your project after you have that prototype. And basically that. And there are only two things that I ask myself at this point of time. Is it fun and memorable? And can I make it accessible? Because I have a strong feeling about accessibility, especially accessibility to people with low vision and who are blind. And if I can't make a prototype accessible, then I won't continue working on it. So for study snacks, I immediately after watching the movie Ex Machina at midnight, I started coding, and I opened Xcode. I used SpriteKit, which is a 2D game engine from Apple. I wrote all the code in Swift. The words here are animals. They're split apart manually. They are entered, the whole data is entered manually, and there's some weird interactions in there, but you see it's not super different to the final product, and as soon as I played around with that, I knew there is something there that excites me and that I find fun and that I want to continue working on. And since I used SpriteKit, it's kind of fairly easy to make that accessible via VoiceOver, so I knew also I can make it accessible. So for the art of fauna, it was a little bit different because this is the first prototype where you have a very simple puzzle, and it worked very well. It also looks very similar to one of the first puzzles in the art of fauna. But it only worked very well, and it was only fun if you could see. But for a blind person, I didn't really know how to make this accessible, because making a visual puzzle game accessible to somebody who's blind, not that easy. So I had this prototype, and I shelved it away until I can find a solution for the problem, and it took me a couple of months until I went to a zoo and then saw a sign like this, where you have a beautiful drawing of an animal and some text about the animal, and I thought I could do something similar for the art of fauna. So I had the idea of you having the possibility to solve the puzzle on an image site, but you can also always click on the little button up there and get a text puzzle, and you can then use thank you. And you can then use VoiceOver to simply put those pieces back together. And the great side effect of that is that many people actually prefer to play it on the text site, because you also learn something about the animal. And so I knew how to make it accessible. It was fun to me, so I continued. And the next step is refinement. And refinement is always about nailing the core experience and getting rid of any interaction quirks. It's important to get the onboarding right. It's important to just give somebody the phone and they immediately get what I want to transport in the app. And I think for this, doing it in person is much better than just doing it over test flight. Test flight has its benefits, and it's good that we can do testing over test flight, but in this phase, it's very important to do tests also in person, because you get so much more from actually watching somebody, how they interact with something, because often they think if they don't understand something, they are too stupid, or they just didn't understand anything, but often it's just a UI quirk that you can easily identify by just watching them interact with your product. And know that you can only get an initial impression from somebody once. So I usually give my prototype to 1 or 2 people, watch their reaction, refine it, then give it to the next batch, and so on until I have something that I feel good about and others feel good about. And I did it in the past at conferences, like this is a games conference where I could exhibit for 2 days and show it to random people, and this is wonderful feedback because nobody knows you there, they don't care about your feelings, so they are very brutal about the feedback there, but it's invaluable and it's really wonderful. And this year at WWDC there was Community Kit where also app developers could exhibit their apps and do something similar there. So this stuff like this is just wonderful and super helpful. But you can also go to local meetups and show your app around there. Or what also worked well in the past for me, you could just buy your friends dinner, and while they're eating, you're suddenly presenting them with your newest app creation and kind of forcing them into trying it out. And that also worked wonderfully. Also, at this point of time, I care about accessibility feedback. I always try to make it as accessible as possible. And if I need some additional refinement, I can go to the AppleVis forums. This is a forum where people who are blind and low vision connect with each other. And I can ask, hey, I made this very accessible, but is there anything that I can still refine there? And people are often very, very helpful in helping you test this out and showing you your interaction quirks with accessibility. And in Swift UI, making things accessible is somewhat easy. So I think there is today not a single excuse to skip on accessibility anymore. And for study snacks, a couple of things changed during this phase. So initially, if you selected some words, you had always to click a checkmark button, and this was just tedious. Nobody actually liked that. They said it slowed them down. And after getting that feedback, I removed the checkmark button, and nobody ever cared about it anymore. So this was one thing that I refined. Second thing was about many people saying it felt too static and too stale. So I came up with the idea that as soon as you tap a bubble, it grows a little bit in size. So since it's physics-based, everything shifts around a little bit, making it feel much more dynamic and much more alive. And my favorite change came by just watching people. So first thing, when I gave somebody an iPhone or an iPad, they always tried to tilt the device because they thought maybe the bubbles would react to the device tilting. But as soon as they realized they didn't react to it, they never spoke a word to me. They just continued playing, and not a single person gave me the feedback. But by watching them, I knew that it could be fun to actually add this little feature where you could just actually turn your device around and throw out all the bubbles and then turn it back in. So wonderful feedback, and this only worked because I watched people interacting with the device. For Art of Fauna, not too much changed, other than I had a strong feeling about the puzzle tiles only connecting vertically after I have a finished row. So you had to first finish all the horizontal rows, and then you could finish it vertically. And this was because if you have both vertical and horizontal clicks together of puzzle tiles, things can get very messy with arbitrary shapes, and arbitrary drag and drop mechanic in general gets much more complicated, and I wanted to avoid that. And I tested it out with many, many people, and they actually didn't like that too much, so I I changed my mind and I just changed it to arbitrary puzzle pieces, and this just feels much more natural. It's kind of the obvious solution now, but back then it wasn't for me. And after I have something that I'm very excited about and that others are very excited about, I want to release it. And I want to release it as quickly as possible. And one thing to do this is through pre-orders. And pre-orders are a wonderful thing in the App Store where you can set a deadline to yourself up to 6 months ahead. You have to think about marketing material somewhat early. So you have to make a full App Store page with descriptions, app reviews, with screenshots and everything. And usually this stuff is what I do last minute. But now, if I have to make a pre-order, I do it much earlier. I can refine it during the development stage, and people, since this is live on the App Store, can actually give me also feedback on it before the app actually launches. And an additional good thing about pre-orders is that Apple sometimes picks it up and features you on the App Store. So that happened for me for the Art of Fauna. I got featured, and that got me over 6,000 pre-orders over 2 months, which are then turned into downloads on the very first day. So it looks like on your charts and in the App Store as if all those 6,000 people would download it on the very first day. It's a little bit spread out here because of different time zones. But that gives you a strong number of downloads on the very first day and a strong position in all the different charts. So pre-orders are a wonderful thing. And just know that if you target a new iOS release, like iOS 26, you can't do a pre-order. And I had to learn this the hard way when launching Pocket Shelf earlier this week, because we wanted to do a pre-order, but you just can't do it in the App Store if you target only iOS 26 or only a new release. The second thing I do is to reuse as much as possible. This is much easier for me now that I have a bunch of apps and I can just carry over code from the different apps. And one of the things that I always carry over, I just throw that on there so that I have some code today. This is a textile modifier that allows me to switch out different fonts very easily. And then I have something called the theme settings that just allow me to change colors very, very easily. And this helps me, if I copy that from project to project, it helps me to iterate upon different designs very quickly. So I can figure out which colors I like, which fonts I like. I can live on them in the actual app for a day and then find out that actually the green doesn't look too good to me, but I like the font. And on the second try, I know the font doesn't really work, but I like this indigo much more. But having a system like this, I can leave that in the app and then give the same tools to the user and let a user then switch out the font for something like a dyslexic font that is more legible for certain kinds of people, or let them change any color in my app so it works better for certain kind of low vision. And things that I constantly reuse are view modifiers, extensions, my privacy policy. I copy over localizations, inner purchase logic, and sounds and haptics handling. And those two setting screens are basically the same code. They're just slightly differently styled. And by just copying around code, I can whip up certain screens in minutes. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the value of reducing scope. So for study snacks, again, I came up with far too many features, as I do with my apps, that I want to have in there on the very first day. But since I made a pre-order, I had a deadline that I had to hold, and I had to get rid of some of those features. But having removed all those features gave me a list of things that I want to do in the future, and every single thing on that list can be an update. And every update I can promote to Apple with the App Store nominations and tell them this comes out in 1 month, this comes out in 2 months, and get a new chance of getting featured. And this worked very well for me in the past. For example, for the widget. I skipped on the initial widget, and then Apple announced the interactive widgets, and I thought, now I can really focus on that, and I can play around with that a little bit more. And I built this little interactive widget where you have a vocabulary trainer directly on your home screen. And that was super fun and super nice to me, and I showed that to Apple, and Apple loves interesting stuff of interesting usages of their new APIs, so they featured it. Back then, Studies Next was still called Study with Subwords, and because of the featuring, the daily active users ran like they got up crazy that one day. So focusing on interesting new APIs and focusing on new stuff that Apple does really can help. And Apple also loves updates for specific events. So if you do an update for now Halloween, which is coming up, or for the holiday season, or for Earth Day of next year, Apple often tends to feature people there. And I did a big update last time when I gave this talk about for the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, where I focused more on accessibility. And Apple picked that up and featured me quite heavily on the App Store. And if you have some features that you want to ship in the future, a thing that you can do is to implement Roadmap. That is a package designed by Antoine, Hide, and Jordi. And that allows you to communicate to your user what you are building next. But it also allows the users to give you feedback in what features they are interested in. So this is now playing an app by Hide, where he implemented this. And here are different features that are coming up in the future, and people can just vote on them. So we went now through the 4 different stages. The idea, which usually comes to me where I least expect it. The prototype, where I want to get to a result as quickly as possible. The refinement stage, where I really want to nail the core experiences and do this mostly in person if possible. And then to release the app as quickly as possible. And if you're in a similar situation that you are now building your new app, really don't worry too much. Get the app out there. You will do fine. And with that, I say thank you very much. And
it's like a master class in what we should be doing. Thank you so much. You talked about Apple's APIs and incorporating those. When Apple does a design change like liquid glass, do you feel that you need to go back to your existing apps and make them change in any way?
Yeah, usually I do.
And can you talk about what you thought about with this change in particular?
Since many of my projects are games, they are often highly stylized. So liquid glass, I didn't do too much changes in certain apps, but for example, for Art of Fauna, it worked quite well because there I could keep the vintage look of it looking like an old book and the liquid glass elements looking like magnifying glasses on that little book. So that worked quite well. So I reworked all the little buttons in Art of Fauna and adapted it a little bit for that.
So I hope you paid attention in the beginning where he said, here's the things I don't worry about. Because a lot of us spend a lot of time on those things that you shouldn't worry about, and I hope you took away that fun and memorable. I mean, these are playful, they're fun, and that thing where you look at the back of Art of Fauna and there's the text and now it's accessible to people, you're just a genius. Thank you so much.
Thank you.